Amarachi woke before the rooster's second cry, tugged her wrapper straight, and slipped from the raffia mat so lightly that even termites in the mud floor stayed dreaming. Dawn squeezed through holes in the tin roof, glinting on the wash basin and the chipped enamel cup she shared with her stepbrother. Outside, harmattan wind rattled dry plantain leaves, making a hollow music that only Amarachi seemed to notice. She answered it with a breathy hum that curled like smoke from her lips. 12 years had carved her thin, but inside her rib cage lived a cathedral of sound ready to fling open stained glass windows whenever loneliness dimmed the world. Loneliness was plentiful in her father's compound now. Since the fever stole Mama Ifeanyi 2 rains ago, her father drifted through hours like a canoe whose paddler had abandoned hope of shore. He spoke little, ate less, and spent afternoons beneath the neem tree tracing circles in dust with a dead pen. Into that silence stepped Mama Eid, his new wife, skin sharp as her tongue. She commanded the house with the efficiency of a military drum but none of its rhythm, glaring whenever Amarachi's feet tapped while sweeping or when her voice rose above a murmur. A girl's virtue is quiet, she warned. Yet sorrow begged to be sung, and Amarachi, half child, half echo of the mother who once filled every corridor with music, could not hold it forever. The compound's back corner hid a tool shed no one loved, warped plywood walls, rusting hose, and the smell of old kerosene. Ivy clawed its window, and a crooked gutter dripped after each rain. To Amarachi it was sanctuary. Each afternoon, chores complete and stepmother distracted, she slipped inside, pulling the door until the latch almost but not quite clicked. Dust motes floated in a single shaft of light, and she would stand in that beam like a solitary actress. An upturned paint bucket served as stool, a splintered plank became a stage, and a cracked mirror fragment on the wall echoed back 100 slivers of her own expectant face. She always began with the lullaby her mother crooned while pounding yam, a tune that rose and dipped like a swallow skimming river water. The first note slid out tentative, the shed breathed it in and made space. She layered a second note, then let ripples bloom into full melody. The sound didn't stay human for long. It grew feathers, mimicking weaver birds in the eaves, softened into the pat-pat of new rain on banana leaves, then swept upward again, natural as inhaling. In those moments she wasn't merely singing, she was translating the village's invisible language, stitching wind, dust, and memory into music only she could weave. Dreams sprouted in that shed. She imagined a radio crackling in the distant city, taxi drivers pausing to ask, "Who is that child with thunder in her throat?" She pictured a stage with lights brighter than midday, a microphone blooming like a silver flower. Applause thundered so vividly that she once dropped the bucket stool in surprise, scattering chickens outside. When reality seeped back, Mama Eid shouted orders, her father's hollow stare. She folded the dreams small and hid them behind her heart where no one could confiscate them. Not even punishment could silence her. Twice Mama Eid yanked open the shed door, catching the tail of a melody. The first time she slapped Amarachi's lips, leaving a sting that tasted of rust. The second, she dragged her by the ear across the yard, hissing that demons rode careless tunes, then locked the shed for a week. Each night Amarachi lay awake shaping silent syllables against the roof of her mouth, learning to sing without sound. When the padlock finally opened, the songs burst forth richer, aged like palm wine kept too long in calabash. Her stepbrother Obiora, small and thoughtful, sometimes lingered outside, ear pressed to the boards. He said little, wary of their mother, but his eyes shone when Amarachi emerged flushed with music. She taught him to tap rhythms on empty biscuit tins. Together they formed secret concerts for geckos and fireflies. If their father wandered close, they fell silent. Yet even he, in rare lucid flashes, seemed to breathe easier, as though songs he wouldn't acknowledge still loosened the knots in his chest. Moonlight made the shed a theater. Crickets formed an eager orchestra while a silver spotlight poured through the cracked roof. She wrapped Mama Ifeanyi's faded headscarf around her shoulders like a queen's mantle and sang lullabies upward, believing the moon might carry them to wherever lost mothers kept guard. Sometimes she swore a harmony drifted back, soft, encouraging, laced with hibiscus fragrance only memory can distill. Those echoes bolstered her belief that voice could bridge worlds the way footpaths bridged farms. Daylight dragged tasks behind it, hens to feed, cassava to peel, water jugs lined like sentries at the well. With each command, Mama Eid chipped at Amarachi's dream, calling her lazy, vain, bewitched. But the girl learned resilience from seeds. Bury them and they find sky. Every reprimand became compost for stronger notes. Every hour in forced silence stretched her imagination wider. One late afternoon she found an old metal funnel in the shed. She held its wide mouth to her lips and sang, The echo magnified her voice into something cavernous and startling. She laughed, a sound that sent a lizard skittering from the window frame. In that laughter she felt power, proof that even junk could amplify beauty if given permission. She practiced with the funnel until sunset painted the sky tangerine, promising herself that real microphones would one day replace makeshift horns. Before bed she etched imaginary posters in her mind. Tonight only, Amarachi, the girl who sings like rain. She dreamed audiences wept, not from sadness but recognition, because her voice held pieces of every human sound. The sigh of wood after heat, the groan of rope in wind, the laughter of water on stones. In those dreams her stepmother sat in the front row unable to look away, her father finally smiling. The vision ended at dawn's first rooster, yet its afterglow lingered like candle scent in a curtained room. So Amarachi woke again, humming with the harmattan wind, ready to trade another day's obedience for a few clandestine minutes on her secret stage. She carried the certainty, fragile yet shining, that songs locked in darkness can still climb walls and find sky. For now, the shed was enough. A place where a 12-year-old girl rehearsed being limitless, the silence between planks thrumming like a drum's skin, promising that the world, though not yet listening, would one day have no choice but to hear. Mama Eid's shout cracked across the courtyard like a dry branch snapping. Enough of that racket, noise from a cursed child, she barked, marching toward the shed where Amarachi's clear notes still lingered in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Amarachi froze, hands gripping the broken funnel she used as a pretend microphone. Her heart galloped, but the last line of the lullaby slipped out before she could swallow it. Mama Eid's shadow cut the doorway in half. She glared, eyes hard as river stones. "From today," she hissed, "your mouth stays shut. No more childish screeching." Amarachi nodded, lips pressed together, but the song kept buzzing under her tongue like a trapped cricket. By dusk she was sweeping cassava peels when a melody sneaked out, soft, almost harmless, a thread of comfort she thought too quiet to betray her. The sound reached Mama Eid anyway. Without a word the woman snatched Amarachi by the wrist, dragged her past the neem tree and shoved her into the tool shed. The padlock clanged shut. Darkness swallowed the girl as dust spun in the single beam of light that seeped through the eaves. Outside, afternoon heat gave way to evening chatter. Neighbors heard commotion but shrugged. They assumed the stepdaughter was lazy again, maybe refusing chores, maybe backtalking. No one asked deeper questions. People seldom did when an orphan child and a stern new wife shared a fence. A pair of red-headed weaver birds perched on the gutter, tilting their heads as if conferring about the strange concert beneath their claws. Each time Amarachi's notes rose, they chirped an answering grace note, wings shivering against tin. Beyond the wall, a goat chewed lazily, ears twitching in approval, while farther off a feverish baby surrendered to sleep, its mother marveling at the sudden hush, never guessing the lullaby was drifting across the village, silent and floating gently through the cool night air on the breath of newborn rain truly. Inside, Amarachi's throat tightened, whether from dust or sorrow she could not tell. Tears slid down her cheeks in salty threads. She wiped them with the back of her hand and felt the echo of the lullaby still thrumming in her chest. She let it rise, first as a low hum, then as full melody, gentle enough not to betray pain, strong enough to keep loneliness at bay. Each tear became a note, each sob a tremor that vibrated into harmony. The shed's wooden slats buzzed faintly, turning her grief into resonance. Hours passed. Shafts of twilight faded to violet, then to pitch black. Amarachi sang to measure time, changing tunes with the stars she could not see. She sang of rivers that never run dry, of mothers whose voices float on wind, of chicks that find their way home by moonlight. Whenever her voice faltered, she placed a palm over her chest and pushed the song outward again, stubborn and bright. Outside, Obiora crept close, bare feet silent on the hard ground. He pressed his ear against a crack in the plank wall. The melody washed over him, trembling and beautiful, like water running over smooth stones. He felt something swell inside, pity, admiration, anger at the injustice he was too small to fight. He closed his eyes, mirroring each line in a whisper he dared not let escape. The song felt like a promise that sadness could bloom into something fragrant. Mama Eid found him there. Her silhouette blotted out the moonlight. "What are you doing, boy?" she hissed. Obiora startled, words jumbled in his throat. "I was just listening." "If you join her," Mama Eid warned, gripping his shoulder hard enough to bruise, "you'll rot with her voice." She hauled him away, pushing him toward the main hut. He glanced back once, eyes wide, lips trembling with unsung questions. The warning echoed like thunder in his small chest, but so did the music. Alone again, Amarachi rested her head against the cool wall. Her voice was thin now, nearly a whisper, yet she kept singing, tracing notes in the darkness as if braiding her mother's hair. Between verses she murmured, "One day someone will hear me." She said it again firmer, "One day someone will hear me." The shed listened, the night insects listened, and the promise settled over her like a blanket. Midnight insects joined as backup choir, chirping in steady rhythm. The smell of wet earth drifted through the cracks, rain coming, a blessing. Amarachi lifted her chin, opened her mouth, and let her song swell with the first drops pattering on the tin roof. The melody mingled with rain percussion, becoming a lullaby for the entire sleeping compound, though few realized it. Even Mama Eid, in the main hut, felt dreams soften though she would not credit the reason. The storm passed, dawn's gray edge cracked the sky. A rooster crowed. The padlock clicked at last and Mama Eid yanked the door open. Amarachi stepped into pale morning light, eyes puffy but steady, voice silent now yet alive beneath her ribs. She gathered her broom without complaint, bowed her head and moved to her tasks. But inside her, the music glowed like embers, ready to flare again at the faintest breath of hope. Amarachi rose in the pearl-gray hour before sunrise, heart beating as if it too had been locked up all night and now groped for air. The shed's latch, usually heavy with rust and Mama Eid's suspicion, hung open because someone, perhaps Obiora, perhaps Providence, had forgotten to slide the bolt. She slipped outside, bare feet whispering across dew-slick soil, and moved quickly past sleeping goats, past the water jars aligned like sentries, past the hut where her stepmother muttered in half-dreams. The sky carried a hush that felt conspiratorial, and the eastern rim glowed faint rose. She skirted the compound, ducked between tall cassava stems, and followed a narrow path to the mango grove bordering the yam fields. There the trees rose like silent witnesses, branches laden with unripe globes that glimmered in the half-light. Amarachi chose the oldest trunk, scarred by storms, hollowed in places where parrots nested, and pressed her back against it. She drew a breath deep enough to stretch her ribs, then opened her mouth. Sound poured out, not timid humming but a pure bell-bright ribbon that leaped from octave to octave like a swallow tasting first wind. She sang the lullaby of rivers remembered from her mother, then twined a high descant above it, improvising until the two melodies braided into something new. Dew shook loose from leaves at the vibration, pattering softly around her feet. Halfway through a rising phrase she sensed movement. Her voice hitched, almost faltering, but curiosity steadied it. Between two trees stood an old woman wrapped in indigo cloth, hair silver as moonwash, eyes shining with startled wonder. She held a basket meant for early fruit picking, yet mangoes lay forgotten at her feet. When Amarachi's song fell silent, the woman stepped forward, lifted a hand as though touching fragile glass and whispered, "That voice is not yours alone. It was born for years." Amarachi's lungs seized. She glanced back toward the village, expecting Mama Eid's wrath to barrel through the crops. Instead, only rooster cries drifted. She bowed her head, ready to flee, but the woman shook her head gently. "Do not fear me, child. I am Neka. I have lived more seasons than this grove has borne fruit. I know when the wind carries something rare." Amarachi found words small and brittle. "My stepmother says singing is noise from a cursed child." Neka's laugh sounded like water against old clay. "Then her ears are closed by grief or pride. Your voice is a river pushing at tight banks. Let it flow." She reached into her basket, produced a half-ripe mango and handed it over. Singing travels better when the tongue tastes sweetness." Amarachi accepted, surprised by tenderness from a stranger. Juice stained her fingertips as the woman watched, eyes patient. They spoke little that morning. Neka asked only Amarachi's name, then pressed a finger to her lips and disappeared into dawn. But 2 days later, when the sky was still violet, Amarachi returned to the grove and found the widow waiting. From then on, their lessons unfolded in secret hours while the village stirred soups and swept yards. Neka carried no instrument, yet she coaxed magic from air. "The breath lives in the pit of the stomach," she explained, placing Amarachi's hands just below her ribs. "Let it lift your spine, then spill through your teeth like light through a door." She demonstrated scales so ancient they seemed carved from the language of rustling leaves. She taught pivot points between chest and head voice, had Amarachi mimic dove coos, rain percussion, and the long mournful whistle of wind crossing empty gourds. Under the mango canopy they blended melodies. Neka's alto, roughened by age but unwavering, undergirded Amarachi's soaring sopranos. Sunbeams filtered green through the leaves, striping their faces like ancestral markings, and each song seemed to draw birds closer. Red bishops hopped along branches, chirping counterpoint. Sometimes Neka paused mid-lesson to tell stories, of priestess singers whose chants calmed smallpox, of hunters guided home by women whose throats echoed drums across valleys, of one legendary girl who sang a warlord sword into rust. Amarachi listened with wide eyes, every tale watering the root of her confidence. When she sang again, she felt those ghost voices rising behind hers, lending spine to each note. Unknown to them, Obiora crept near. He had followed Amarachi on a hunch, clutching the battered cell phone he'd discovered in a trader's discard pile years ago, a relic with cracks spidering the screen, but its recorder still worked. Hiding behind elephant grass, he tapped the red button whenever Amarachi sang. The tiny microphone captured birdsong, wind hiss, the rustle of Neka's wrapper, and glowing at the center Amarachi's liquid gold voice. Each time she stopped, Obiora ended the file, tucking the phone inside his shirt with a thud of triumph in his chest. He didn't yet know what he would do with these fragments, only that they were seeds needing soil larger than his pocket. One dawn, Neka challenged Amarachi to sustain a single note as long as dawnlight touched the highest mango leaf. She placed a stone at the base of the trunk to mark time. Amarachi inhaled, let the air settle low and released tone, a narrow beam that quivered then steadied. She pictured her mother's face, the locked shed, Obiora's quiet loyalty, and poured all of it into that note. Seconds stretched, dew gathered on the stone, a sunray inched toward the marked leaf. When her breath finally gave, birds startled overhead as if the sudden silence were louder than the sound. Neka clapped, tears bright in her wrinkles. "You have found the riverbed," she said. "Now you must carry others on its water." Amarachi's joy glowed, yet fear lingered like a shadow at noon. She asked what would happen if Mama E discovered their lessons. Neka's answer was simple: a caged song will either die or roar. Better to risk roaring. She pressed a small gourd of honey into Amarachi's hands. "Drink before you sing. It coats the road the notes travel." The weeks folded, lessons etching muscle memory into Amarachi's diaphragm, stories planting courage in her mind. Each night she returned to the shed able to bear its dark walls because dawn promised music beneath mango leaves. She hummed softly as she cleaned pots, catching herself but daring one extra phrase, then two. Mama Eid eyed her suspiciously but couldn't pin down proof. Meanwhile, Obiora filled the phone's meager memory. At twilight he played the clips back, volume low, marveling that the thin speaker could still shimmer with Amarachi's tone. He imagined those sounds bouncing across radio waves, entering houses of people who believed villages bred only farmers, not miracles. He imagined applause loud enough to drown the shed's lock forever. So each dawn he followed again, crouching among wild marigolds while Neka guided Amarachi to higher keys. One morning as the trio parted, Amarachi slipping toward chores, Neka gathering herbs, Obiora tucking away the phone, a breeze stirred the mango branches into applause. None knew yet how soon that hidden clapping would become real, or how far a voice born in secrecy could travel once carried by someone bold enough to press record. The midday sun clanged against every zinc roof as if drumming up tempers, and the market lane shimmered with heat ghosts when Amarachi's voice spilled from the goat shed. It began as a careful hum, the private spiral exercise Neka had taught her. Let the tone coil inward like smoke, then unfurl. She had finished scattering cassava peels for the nanny goats and forgetting herself, let the hum bloom into full melody. A stall keeper passing with a basket of groundnuts paused, head tilted. Then came Mama Eid, hips swaying with righteous purpose. The moment her ears caught the rising scale, she barreled through the gate and across the yard, skirts snapping like whipcord. Before Amarachi could swallow the note, a palm cracked against her cheek, heat and clang in the same instant. The slap rang so loudly hens fluttered up to rafters. Noise from a cursed child. Mama Eid roared. She dragged Amarachi by the arm into the courtyard where neighbors washing Gary paused to gape. She wants to be a bird, then let her live with them. Another yank and Amarachi stumbled toward the toolshed. The door slammed, the iron padlock clicked twice. Dust plumed as the woman wiped her hands and turned to the small crowd now gathering. A few laughed behind cupped palms, thin sound but sharp. That one? A singer? She'd scare crows off millet. Others shook heads, half pitying, half amused. When Mama Eid stomped back into the compound, her skirts swirled triumphantly. Inside the shed, Amarachi swallowed a metallic taste. The slap still tingled, but deeper than pain was humiliation, a hot coal lodged behind her ribs. She pressed her back to the wall and let tears come. Yet tears quickly turned to vibration, Each trembling breath felt like the first pluck of a string. She remembered Neka's words, "A caged song will either die or roar." Closing her eyes, she drew air low into her belly, relaxed her shoulders, opened her mouth and sang. This time the melody was no lullaby. It was a river-deep lament that bent into a question, then climbed until it brushed ceiling beams, slid down again in minor thirds, and hovered like an unanswered prayer. Darkness shaped the acoustics, giving her voice new timbre. Woody, seasoned by dust, richer. She repeated the phrase, altering vowels, tasting pain as resonance rather than wound. Each repetition sanded roughness off the note. Each echo polished it until the shed vibrated in sympathy. By nightfall her throat felt raw, yet her spirit felt coated in bronze. Outside, Obiora hovered near the wall, tears slicking his cheeks. The slap had sent him fleeing earlier, but guilt reeled him back. He pressed the old phone to the crack between planks. The tiny screen pulsed red, recording every swell and sigh of Amarachi's evolving him. In the distance crickets joined the undertone. Raindrops began needling the zinc roof, adding high percussion. Obiora's hands shook, but he kept the phone steady until the battery warning blinked. Only then did he retreat, clutching the device like a lantern. The next morning a murmur rippled through the village. Mama Eid had doubled the sentence, 2 days for insolence. People wagged heads. Some chuckled that perhaps the girl would learn silence. Others mimicked a flapping bird, lifting elbows like wings. Neka, hearing the gossip, felt her pulse rise. She hobbled toward the compound under pretense of selling woven mats, but Mama Eid blocked the gate. "No visitors for disobedience," she snapped. Neka's gaze burned steady, yet she turned away, mind already plotting. That afternoon Obiora slipped from chores and hurried to the widow's hut on the grove's edge. He found Neka grinding dried baobab leaves for tea. Wordlessly he pressed the phone into her palm and tapped play. Amarachi's voice flooded the small room, at first hushed, then climbing until rafters seemed to sway. Neka's eyes shone wet, her hands stilled on the mortar. When the final note faded into static, she exhaled. "Child," she whispered, "this is thunder wearing silk." Obiora shuffled. "What do we do?" "My cousin Chima visits tomorrow, passing through to the city. He knows someone at Silver Drum Radio." She wrapped the phone in goatskin and wrote a quick note explaining the mystery singer from Umuogudu. Obiora watched, equal parts terrified and elated. "Will Amarachi be angry?" he ventured. "She will be free," Neka said. "Freedom is rarely quiet." That night, rain came harder, drumming steady as a slow-tempo gem on the shed roof. Inside, Amarachi sang again, this time layering harmonies, testing echoes until chords shimmered like light beneath water. She pictured Neka's stories of priestess singers stirring monsoon from clear skies, of warriors lulled to peace by voices that sounded like tomorrow. Her own notes felt larger than walls, too vibrant to stay contained. Between songs she whispered, "One day someone will hear me," and the shed's shadows seemed to nod in agreement. Dawn broke. Chima passed through as promised, accepting the goatskin bundle with raised eyebrows. Neka told him only, "Guard this like a talisman. Deliver it to producer Keen." Chima tucked it inside his satchel, sensing urgency, and set off along the red dirt road toward the station wagon taxi. By midday he was miles away, phone battery dead but treasure intact. Back in Omuogudu, the shed door remained shut until sunset. When Mama Eid finally opened it, ready to see a cowed girl, Amarachi stepped out tall, eyes luminous despite exhaustion. She carried no bitterness, only an unspoken anthem stitched now into her marrow. Wind snaked through the cassava leaves then, lifting dust and swirling around mother, daughter, and watching neighbors. Some swore it hummed a fragment of the very song that had kept Amarachi alive in the dark. Proof that even when mocked, a voice can hitch itself to the breeze and travel far beyond village gates, searching for the ears it was born to reach. It began like any other Thursday evening in the city. Traffic snarled between yellow buses, suya smoke curled into the twilight, and radios blared across balconies, shop fronts, and taxis. On Silver Drum Radio, the Evening Echoes program welcomed listeners with its usual mix of soft drums, folktale snippets, and unreleased tracks from hidden talents across the country. The host, known simply as Uncle Ray, had a gravel-smooth voice that made people lean in closer. "Tonight," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "we have something different." The beat that followed was not a beat at all, but a wind, soft, rising, twirling, and then, like sunlight parting clouds, a girl's voice emerged. No auto-tune, no heavy instruments, just breath and song so rich it stopped traffic. It was a sound ancient and new, fragile yet powerful, the kind of voice that made you forget to blink. The song had no title listed, but Uncle Ray named it on the spot, Voice of the Wind. In the studio, even the sound engineer forgot to check his levels. Call lines blinked red almost immediately. A woman in Enugu asked, "Who is she? I need to hear it again." A taxi driver in Jos turned up the volume and pulled over. An elderly man in Port Harcourt phoned in crying, saying it reminded him of his late wife singing in their yam barn. Uncle Ray leaned into the mic again. "Listeners, this just arrived in our hands. No name, no bio." A note said, "From a village girl, sent with love from her elder." Just pure magic. Far from the city in Umuogudu, the sky was dusky orange and the air thick with night cooking, groundnut stew, roasted maize, okra bubbling in pots. Radios crackled in a few compounds, tuned more for news than music. At Neka's hut, her old wooden set hissed to life. She'd been waiting, fingers trembling as she twisted the dial. Then came the first note. She gasped. Her pounding heart quieted to listen. She knew that voice. Knew it from mango mornings and shed midnights. She closed her eyes as Amarachi's voice filled her walls. 2 compounds over, Baba Njoku spilled his palm wine in surprise. "What is this now?" he murmured. His wife leaned closer. "That voice, it sounds like that girl, the one always being locked up. What's her name again?" "Amarachi?" someone nearby suggested. A group gathered. Word spread fast. By the time the second verse played, radios were turned up across the village. People stopped pounding yam. Fires crackled unattended. Even the goats seemed to grow quiet. In the chief's compound, one of the guards murmured, "It's like the trees are singing through her." In Amarachi's own compound, the radio was set low in the background, playing while Mama eats sliced bitter leaf. At first she didn't notice. But Obiora, sitting near the doorway, froze. His spoon hovered midair. Then came the note he knew too well, the exact climb and tone that Amarachi had practiced one evening beside the shed. His eyes widened. He turned slowly toward the radio. Mama Eid frowned. "What is that noise they're playing now?" He said nothing at first. The song continued, sweet and bold, unfurling like the harmattan wind before harvest. Then came the part that clinched it, one phrase Amarachi always sang with a catch in her throat, the exact breath before the final line. Obiora stood slowly. "It's her." Mama Eid looked up, puzzled. "Who?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the radio and turned it up. "Listen," he whispered. The final chorus played, as haunting and perfect as dawn light on wet soil. The announcer returned, voice thick with awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know who she is, but I've been playing music for 20 years and I've never heard a voice like that. If anyone out there knows this singer, tell her this nation is listening." Silence fell. Then Obiora turned to his stepmother, voice shaking not from fear but from wonder. "It's Amarachi. She's on the radio." They heard her. Mama Eid stared, wooden spoon frozen mid-stir. "You're lying." Obiora shook his head. "I recorded her. Neka sent it. That's her voice. The whole country heard it just now." The radio still crackled softly, repeating fragments as people called in, praising the song, asking where to find more. Amarachi was not in the hut. She had been sent to fetch firewood. But even from the outskirts of the village she had heard a voice floating from a neighbor's compound. A voice too familiar, too close to be anyone else. She stopped walking. Dropped the bundle of twigs. Her breath caught as the final note echoed through someone's window. It was her. She stood in the middle of the footpath, frozen as a sudden gust swept leaves around her ankles. She whispered, barely believing her own words. "They heard me?" Back in the compound, Mama Eid lowered herself to the stool, suddenly unsure of her own fingers. Her face remained stern, but her hands trembled. Amarachi, the girl she had locked in sheds and silenced with shame, had slipped past her, straight into radios, hearts, and the waiting world. And she hadn't even left the village. In the distance someone turned up their radio louder. The villagers listened again. But this time they did not laugh. They stood still, quiet, listening not just to a girl's song, but to the echo of a miracle they could no longer deny. Ask ChatGPT. The hum of the black SUV arrived before the vehicle itself, a smooth, purring sound unlike any engine Omuogudu had heard. Goats scattered from the red dust road as the glossy machine nosed past the last cassava ridge and rolled to a halt beside the marketplace, clouds of ochre swirling around its tires. A silence followed, short, sharp, electric, then everything burst into motion. Children sprinted ahead, bare feet slapping earth. Traders abandoned pepper pyramids and yam scales. Women yanked head ties straight. Men pulled shirts closed over paunches. The SUV's doors stayed shut a heartbeat longer, tinted windows reflecting a village full of widening eyes. Finally the driver stepped out, smoothed a charcoal suit that looked softer than silk, and opened the rear door with ceremonial care. Out emerged a tall man in a linen shirt crisp enough to slice sunlight. His shoes shone like bottled midnight. He surveyed the gathering faces, curious, cautious, expectant, then raised a hand in greeting. The crowd stilled as if the gesture were a command. "Good afternoon," he said, voice carrying the measured cadence of radio. "My name is Keen Udoka. I'm a music producer from Silver Drum Studios, Lagos." The children exchanged excited whispers, "Lagos," but the adults held their breath. "I'm here to find the owner of a remarkable voice we aired 2 nights ago." The note that accompanied the recording mentioned only a village elder and a girl named Amarachi. He glanced around. "Please, who is she?" No one moved. The chief's senior wife frowned, uncertain. A few villagers dropped gazes to dusty toes. Awe, suspicion and protectiveness tangled in the air. Mr. Keen waited, patient but purposeful. Seconds stretched like pulled taffy until Obiora slid from behind a firewood stack, knees wobbling. He looked for Mama Eid, she was nowhere yet, then lifted one tentative hand. I know her," he stammered. Eyes swiveled toward the boy, relief and blame mingled on older faces. Mr. Keen offered a small smile. "Will you take me to her, please?" Obiora swallowed, then nodded. He led the producer through the market lane, heart thudding against his ribs. They reached the compound gate just as Mama Eid stormed outside, wrapper flaring like a warning flag. Eyes narrowed, she took in the city man, the boy, and the ring of villagers trailing behind. "What is this disturbance?" she snapped. Mr. Keen introduced himself again. "Madam, I believe your stepdaughter possesses the voice the whole country is talking about." "She possesses chores," Mama Eid retorted. "Not fancy dreams." At that moment Amarachi appeared from the shed area, headscarf damp with sweat, a bundle of washed clothes in her arms. She froze when she saw the stranger and the SUV beyond the gate. Mr. Keen's expression shifted, first curiosity then astonishment. "That voice came from her?" he murmured almost to himself. His eyes softened. "You're Amarachi?" She nodded, clutching the laundry like a shield. The producer's voice gentled. "I heard you sing, child. You have a gift meant for stages, for ears far beyond here." Mama Eid stepped between them. "She's my responsibility," she declared, chin high. "You city people will fill her head with nonsense." Mr. Keen kept his tone respectful, but firmness edged each syllable. "Madam, her voice belongs to the world now, not to fear." He glanced toward the gathering crowd. "Will the elders speak?" As if summoned, Neka emerged from behind the neem tree, leaning on her staff, eyes bright with vindication. She said nothing, only placed one hand on Amarachi's shoulder. The chief, having been sent for, arrived moments later in full ceremonial wrapper. He listened to Mr. Keen's explanation, to Mama Eid's protests, to whispers swirling like flies. Then he addressed Amarachi directly. "Child, do you wish to go?" Amarachi searched faces, the anxious glow in Obiora's, the pleading hope in Neka's, the clenched disdain in Mama Eid's. Images flashed, the shed's darkness, mango tree dawns, the shock of hearing her own song on crackling air. Her answer floated up from the place songs lived. "Yes, chief. I want to sing." The chief nodded, gravity lining his brow. "So be it. Our village has grown small for what lives in your throat." He signaled 2 youths to fetch cola and gin. An impromptu blessing formed. Elders spat cola, poured libation, invoked ancestors to guard journeys. Mama Eid folded her arms, lips pressed thin, but the battle was slipping from her grasp. Neka pressed a small woven bag into Amarachi's palm. Inside, the honey gourd and a new notebook for lyrics. Obiora ran into the hut and returned with Amarachi's most treasured item. Her late mother's faded headscarf, laundered soft as memory. He tied it carefully around her shoulders. Tears threatened, but Amarachi inhaled the way Neka had taught, filling the diaphragm, steadying the heart. Mr. Keen opened the SUV door. "You'll have a room of your own, tutors, proper meals, and a studio where your voice can breathe," he promised. Amarachi hesitated only long enough to touch the compound wall, rough mud beneath fingertips, as if signing her name there. Mama Eid looked away, arms falling to her sides. As Amarachi settled into the back seat, Obiora squeezed her hand through the window. "I'll hear you on every radio," he whispered. She smiled. "I'll send recordings for you first," she replied. The SUV engine rumbled to life. Dust lifted, swirling like spirits dancing approval. Children waved, women wiped eyes, men nodded solemn respect. Nneka stood tallest, silent, proud, the mango grove framing her like cathedral pillars. She and Amarachi locked eyes one last time. In that gaze their secret lessons lived on. The chief raised his staff in farewell. The car rolled forward, past cassava and yam fields, toward the highway glinting in the distance. Inside, Amarachi clutched her mother's headscarf, watching huts shrink, feeling fear and wonder braid together. The wind slipping through the cracked window carried the faintest scent of mango blossoms and dust, reminding her that songs, like seeds, travel far yet always remember the soil that loved them first. The city rose around Amarachi like a stone forest, its towers catching sunset and throwing it back as silver flames. Traffic roared in every direction, 1,000 engines hissing like restless serpents, horns stuttering unfamiliar rhythms. Billboards taller than the Irako tree back home flashed faces she didn't know, lips that kept selling promises she couldn't read fast enough. Yet through the assault of sound and color she felt an odd bubble of safety. The car's back seat and Mr. Keen's calm presence were a moat against chaos. He pointed out landmarks, Radio House, the National Theater, bridges stitched with neon, without demanding conversation, letting her search the skyline in silence. They reached the studio compound at dusk. Palms lined the driveway and soft lights glowed under their fronds. Inside, polished floors reflected overhead bulbs so perfectly she half feared slipping into another world if she stepped too hard. Mr. Keen led her to a small apartment, a bed with cloud-white sheets, a desk, a wardrobe already hung with simple dresses. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start gently." He placed a keycard in her palm and left, door clicking soft as a heartbeat. Sleep was shallow, city sirens rose and fell all night, and even the air conditioner hummed a metallic lullaby. She lay awake whisper-singing scales, pretending Obiora was outside the wall recording everything. At dawn she wrapped her mother's headscarf around her hair and followed corridor arrows to the canteen, where a cook greeted her with yam porridge and a shy grin. He'd heard the radio song and recognized her. Surprise fluttered her stomach. Fame, it seemed, moved faster than dawnlight. Later that morning Mr. Keen introduced her to two voice coaches, Auntie Sola, round and warm, and Monsieur Diallo, tall, reed-thin, with eyes that measured breath itself. They asked her to sing a simple major scale. She did softly. The room resonated. Auntie Sola's eyebrows shot up. Diallo closed his eyes, savored the reverberation, then murmured, "Wind between drums." They spent hours teaching her diaphragmatic breathing. "Pretend you are filling a clay pot, not a teacup," Sola said, placing palms on Amarachi's lower ribs. Diallo made her enunciate vowels until each one spun like a coin in midair. They corrected posture but praised humility. "Talent is seed," he told her, tapping her chest. "Humility is soil. Without soil, seed dries." Between lessons, engineers brought her into booths to record scratch demos, short verses over minimal guitar or bare piano. She wore headphones the size of calabashes and faced a microphone so sleek it seemed stolen from the future. Each time the red light blinked, nerves pricked her skin, but she remembered Nneka's advice. "Breathe low, open the door of your teeth, let light out." The engineers exchanged glances. Her raw takes needed almost no tuning. Still, Amarachi missed the earthy smell of the mango grove, the quiet patter of Obiora's biscuit tins. Each evening she scribbled letters she hadn't time to send, describing skyscrapers that seemed to tilt into sky like curious goats, describing how traffic lights changed colors with the authority of chiefs. Loneliness gnawed hardest at night. She curled beneath the duvet and thought of Mama Dada spinning stories, of Nneka's leathered hand guiding her ribs, of Obiora grinning when a high note hit perfect pitch. Tears threatened. She sang a lullaby under her breath to keep them at bay. Yet sorrow seeped into melody, adding depth she could not name. One afternoon, during yet another demo session, Mr. Keen asked if she had an original song. Her throat tightened. She thought of the shed and the promise she'd whispered to darkness. She nodded. They dimmed lights, left her alone with the mic. She closed her eyes and inhaled until the bottom of her lungs tingled. Words emerged soft, tentative. Locked away but the night still hears / wooden walls but the wind is near. Melody rose, simple as heartbeat. On the chorus her voice lifted 2 octaves. Shed no more, let the rafters fall / I will be the song that shatters every wall. Midway through memories surged. Mama Eid's slap, the padlock's cold bite, Obiora's brave recordings. Tears broke free, sliding down her cheeks even as she held the note. Her voice wavered, then steadied, richer for the salt. She sang the final line, a whisper of triumph, and silence flooded the booth. The engineer's finger hovered over the stop button, too stunned to move. In the control room, two producers stared at waveform peaks glowing on screens like mountain ranges. Mr. Keene exhaled a wordless prayer. No one spoke for nearly a minute. "Did we get it?" the junior engineer finally croaked. The senior nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "In one take." They titled the file "Shed No More, Master." That evening they mixed the track lightly, bare piano, a breath of strings, determined not to bury the raw vocal. At midnight Mr. Keene uploaded it to the studio's social pages with the caption, "Remember the anonymous voice of the wind? Meet Amarachi. This is her story." He hit publish, heart thudding. By sunrise the post was tearing across platforms. Comments bloomed like wildfire petals. I felt goosebumps from note 1. "Who is this angel? I played it for my mom and she cried." Streaming links multiplied. An influencer stitched the chorus over a montage of sunrise landscapes. A gospel choir tweeted they'd arranged harmonies already. Radio stations replayed the song on loop. Presenters confessed they'd listened 7 times without fatigue. Amarachi, woken early for press prep, blinked at the view count climbing by tens of thousands. She touched the headscarf and whispered thank you to the shed, to the mango leaves, to the wind that first carried her small secret into a waiting world. She was still learning to breathe, but every inhale tasted more like freedom. In less than a month, Amarachi became more than a song. She became a presence, a name that curled through markets, taxis, classrooms, parlors, and prayer circles. Amarachi, the girl from the shed, the voice of the wind. Her story was picked up by bloggers, morning news shows, and celebrity hosts. Headlines bloomed like fever grass. From silence to sound. Meet Nigeria's radio queen, girl locked for singing finds her freedom in music. Shed no more, how a village voice shook the nation. Despite the attention, Amarachi remained quiet in interviews. TV hosts expected a dramatic speaker, but were instead met with a girl who bowed her head, smiled softly, and answered questions with simple, honest thanks. "Who inspired your first song?" they asked. "Pain," she replied. "And kindness." When they asked about the woman who raised her, she only said, "Every wall teaches you something. Mine taught me how to echo." Producers quickly realized the fewer the words, the deeper her mystery grew. It only made the nation more obsessed. Her voice, weather-worn and honey-smooth, dominated radio charts. Every station had a slot for her. Her songs stitched themselves into people's days. Market women hummed them as they arranged plantains, conductors played her on morning buses, even schoolchildren in Lagos wrote essays titled "What Amarachi Taught Me." From the Delta to the North, her sound poured through broken speakers and golden ones alike. Her second single, "Hollow Echo," released a week after the first, went viral again, its chorus captured in the whispers of thousands. Back in Omuogudu, the transformation was swift and strange. Villagers who once mocked her suddenly remembered everything differently. "That voice? From our village," they said proudly, lips pursed. "Born right here. I used to hear her sing near the mango tree," lied one trader who had thrown peelings at her. "She was always gifted, I told people, but they didn't listen," claimed another. They pointed out her old shed as if it were a shrine, its dusty walls now sacred. Someone carved the words she sang here on the door. A few suggested renaming the market road after her. But envy slithered through the praise. Mama grew sick with it. Every radio song felt like a slap. Each interview was a reminder. She sneered when others clapped for Amarachi. "They don't know what that girl really is," she hissed. "That voice, it wasn't natural. Something bewitched her. That widow Neka, she fed her forest herbs. She whispered these things in doorways and into palm wine mugs. She invented stories, that Amarachi sang to mirrors at night, that her mother had once been a river woman who never blinked. She claimed the voice belonged to a spirit that would one day demand payment. But fewer and fewer people listened. They were too busy learning Amarachi's lyrics. Meanwhile, Obiora was thriving. Journalists discovered his part in Amarachi's rise, how he'd recorded her secretly, how he had defied fear to send the song. A private school in the city offered him a full scholarship to study media arts. "Your ear changed history," the letter said. He arrived in Lagos 3 weeks after Amarachi's first single charted, overwhelmed by the height of buildings and the endless blinking lights, but reassured by the familiar weight of his sister's headscarf greeting him at the airport. Amarachi hugged him tightly and whispered, "I told you someone would hear me." At the studio he was given an internship, helping edit behind the scenes, learning the craft of sound. He called Neka every Sunday, describing everything he saw, elevators, studios, even the smell of city rain. And every week, Amarachi wrote letters to Neka too, long ones handwritten, folded carefully into banana leaf envelopes. With each letter came something new, a silk scarf, a framed photo, a cassette tape of unreleased tracks. Neka kept them in a carved box beside her lantern. She read them aloud each night, as if Amarachi's voice was still brushing mango leaves outside. By mid-season, Amarachi was recording her debut album. She named it Voice of the Shed. It was not loud. It was not glossy with synthetic sounds or rushed beats. It was a tapestry of hushes, of breath and resilience, of hidden power. Each song painted a different part of her journey. Shadow of Rafters was about fear, the kind that trembles in the bones when silence is forced. Mama's Lullaby used old melodies her mother once sang, woven into modern chords. The Locked Door ended with 20 seconds of nothing, pure silence, before one final, trembling note. And the closing track, One Window, was about Obiora's listening ear and the small hope that cracked open her prison. When the album dropped, it didn't just top charts, it stopped people. Some cried. Some prayed. Some sat on verandas for hours listening on repeat. Teachers played it in classrooms. Pastors quoted her lyrics in sermons. For once, people didn't just hear music, they heard a story. And Amarachi, the girl once mocked for singing alone, became not just a radio queen, but a queen of remembering, the sounds of struggle, the ache of waiting, and the grace of being heard at last. The dry season had just begun when Amarachi returned to Umuogudu. No press, no cameras, no glinting SUV with tinted windows. Just a modest town car, dust-streaked from the long journey, crawling up the familiar red road with Obiora at the wheel and Neka dozing in the back. The sun hovered low, turning the cassava leaves gold and stretching long shadows across the path. Amarachi wore no makeup, no jewelry. Only her mother's headscarf, now carefully embroidered with small golden thread in one corner, Voice of the Shed. Her clothes were simple, her heart full. She hadn't told the radio stations or her fan clubs or the endless stream of bloggers who tracked her every move. This return wasn't for them. It was for the soil that once held her tears, for the tree that once listened, and for the shed that once swallowed her voice. They arrived just after dusk. No one noticed at first. Chickens fluttered to their roosts and pots clattered as women made night stew. Children kicked rubber balls in the street. Amarachi stepped out quietly, feet bare, toes pressing into the same earth she'd once walked in fear. Obiora helped Neka from the car. The old woman's walking stick tapped against her joy as she whispered, "You came home like thunder wrapped in silence." Without a word, Amarachi walked past her old compound. The shed still stood, smaller now as if shame had shrunk it. Her eyes lingered but she moved on toward the mango tree near the edge of the grove. The tree had grown slightly, its trunk thickened, its roots curling deeper into stories. She stood under it and looked up at the branches that once framed her earliest audience, the wind, the sky, and hope. Then she began to sing. No microphone. No backup track. Just her voice, bare and clear, weaving through the leaves like smoke from an ancient fire. It was a lullaby one mama had hummed during fevered nights, gentle, rising and falling like the hush of waves. Her voice floated across the clearing, reaching doors, windows, and ears that had once scoffed at it. One by one people emerged. First the children, wide-eyed and whispering, "It's her, it's Amarachi." Then the adults, slower, unsure how to stand before someone they had once treated like noise. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just listened. Mama Eid stood at the edge of her compound, hands folded, eyes unreadable. Her wrapper was faded now and her face thinner. She said nothing. She didn't move. But her lips were tight with something between bitterness and disbelief, her posture shrinking as if the sound itself were a mirror. Amarachi finished the song and silence swelled around her like soft light. Then she turned and walked slowly to the shed. The lock was still there, rusted, clinging to the wooden door like an old wound. She knelt, touching it gently. Her fingers brushed the metal as if it were a friend from long ago. She leaned in, her voice barely a breath. "Thank you." Obiora and Neka stood nearby, quiet. Behind them, the villagers gathered. Some looked ashamed, some awed, all silent. Amarachi turned to the children, who had come closest. They stared at her with round, hopeful eyes, their hands tucked behind backs, unsure if they were allowed to speak. She smiled. "You hear many voices in your life," she said, voice strong but soft. "Some will try to silence you. Others will say you're too loud, too strange, too much. But listen to me, your voice is not noise. It's a seed." The children nodded slowly, some reaching out to touch the edge of her wrapper as if touching part of her song. One girl whispered, Will mine grow too? Amarachi bent down and cupped the girl's cheek. If you water it with truth. A ripple moved through the crowd. A woman spoke softly, she's not just Amarachi now. She's Ada Ife. Others repeated it like a chant carried by wind, Ada Ife, daughter of light. The name fit her like a second skin, gifted not by fame or followers, but by the people who finally saw her, not as a strange girl who fed melodies to darkness, but as one who had carried light through it. She stayed until the moon rose. The villagers dispersed slowly as if reluctant to let the magic end. Mama Eid disappeared behind her door, her shadow the last to leave. Later, as she sat beside Neka and Obiora under the same mango branches, Amarachi looked up. The stars blinked gently. The wind stirred the leaves again. This time it sounded like applause. Ask ChatGPT. The mango grove awoke to the scrape of shovels and the thump of freshly milled planks, a rhythm the tree had never heard yet seemed to welcome. Carpenters from the next town laid a square of red-baked bricks where weeds once grew, leveling the earth while Amarachi stood barefoot at the edge with a clay jug of water ready for the first blessing. She paid for the labor with royalties from Voice of the Shed, sliding crisp notes across calloused palms, refusing any discount. Build it honest, she said. Sound travels on truth. When the foundation cured, walls rose of smooth adobe the color of late-season yam. Open slats near the roofline invited breeze. The north wall, facing the tree's broadest limb, was fitted with a salvaged glass panel to let green light tumble inside. A single wooden plaque, hand-painted by the village sign maker, was bolted over the door. The wind shed. No grand gates, no neon, just those words and the soft rustle of mango leaves overhead. Inside, the studio was spare but deliberate. Foam baffling lined two corners, drums sat on reed mats, and a second-hand upright piano, tuned until its aging strings rang clear, waited against the back wall. Microphones hung from beams like curious birds. Shelves held maracas made from gourd and seed, homemade kalimbas, clay flutes, biscuit tin shakers, whatever children's hands could craft. Amarachi kept one rolling chair near the console, nothing more. She wanted room for voices to stretch. Word spread as easily as gossip. Before sunrise some mornings, a line of little ones already wound through the cassava patch, clutching notebooks, bottle-cap tambourines, or only hope. Amarachi greeted each by name, tapping her small brass bell once to call them in. Lessons often began with silence. She asked them to close their eyes, count the insects, measure the wind's pitch against their own breath. Then came humming, scale games, story songs. She never wrote their lyrics for them, she coaxed images, rivers humming under moonlight, grandmother's slippers scuffing verandas, rain drumming palm fronds, and let the children chase phrases the way fireflies chase dusk. She lived in a modest hut just beyond the grove, refusing the city apartment Mr. Keene had offered. Her bed was straw, her wardrobe a peg on the wall, her greatest luxury a record player salvaged from a scrap dealer so she could spin ancient high-life records after the day's final lesson. Even in rest she listened, how the bass line of cicadas dropped after midnight, how the first rooster crow bent a tone sharper after harmattan. Every sound was a teacher. Obiora flourished beside her. The scholarship had sharpened his ear. Now he sat behind the studio's console, eyes darting between waveforms and faders with the quiet confidence of someone who once captured gold on a cracked phone. He coached the children through their first takes, whispering, "Let the mic drink your breath," and edited until shy soprano wobbles became shining arcs. The village soon claimed him too. Engineer Obi they called, proud as if they'd always known. The only shadow lay in Mama Eid's hut. Age and bitterness had hollowed her, leaving ribs like spooned clay and eyes that flickered between spite and regret. Word reached Amarachi that coughs kept the woman awake, fever clung to her afternoons. So one quiet evening, while the grove glowed amber in sunset, Amarachi carried a pot of pepper soup to the doorstep she once feared. Inside, smoke hung heavy. Mama Eid lay on a mat, blanket thin across her knees. She stared as Amarachi set the pot near the hearth, ladled broth into a calabash and knelt without speaking. The older woman's voice was cracked tinder. "Your voice, it still shames me." Tears seeped along the lines of her cheeks. Amarachi lifted a spoonful, cooled it with a breath, and held it to those trembling lips. "No," she said softly, "it still forgives you." They exchanged no more words. Amarachi stayed until the pot emptied, unfolded a clean wrapper over the frail shoulders, then left as silently as she'd arrived, the mango leaves whispering above like pages turning. Weeks later, on an afternoon bright enough to bleach shadows, children had dispersed, and Obiora was calibrating mics inside. Amarachi wandered back to the old compound, drawn by a faint melody threading the heat. She paused outside the very shed where she'd first found her echo. The door stood ajar. Inside, a tiny girl, perhaps 6, hair in unruly plaits, stood on an overturned bucket, eyes closed, palms open as if cradling invisible light. Her voice was thin but fearless, a hesitant river finding stones. The same warped walls trembled with each note. Amarachi did not enter. She leaned against the outer plank, listening, remembering how darkness once taught her to hear herself. When the girl reached a high phrase and nearly faltered, Amarachi whispered encouragement the child could not hear but the wood carried inward like a secret breeze. The notes steadied, shimmered, and fell gently to silence. A moment later the child scurried out, startled to see a tall woman waiting. Amarachi only smiled, pressed a shell pendant into the small hand, and pointed toward the grove where the wind shed glowed between leaves. The girl's eyes widened and she ran toward the promise of instruments and air. Amarachi watched her go, heart swelling like a drum's skin warmed by sun. She glanced once more at the shed, at the stubborn lock still dangling even though the door gaped wide, and let a soft laugh rise in her throat, more gratitude than amusement. "Let the world mock your beginnings," she whispered. "But sing anyway."